they usually go by, because they usually have standards.
You want to stay true to what you're drawing from.
Yeah, especially when you're first starting out. I mean, later on you can definitely like pull out of those and like become very experimental. But yeah, in this case, like we definitely want to like limit that. And then after that, I kind of go and I'll look for a sample or a sound.
What do you use to find your samples?
So I use a couple different websites. Cinematics is one of them, and they kind of just sell you these little USBs, and they have a bunch of really good samples on them. Mm-hmm. And then I also use Splice, and Splice basically is a bunch of musicians have put samples up that you can use, license. Well, once you pay for the sample, you can use that in your own works.
They're royalty free.
Some of them, yes. Some of them up to a certain limit.
Oh,
so,
okay.
If you have like especially with vocals, depending on the vocal, they'll put certain stipulations like, oh, once you hit 10,000 songs, then the contract has to be renegotiated or whatever. And I think like coming from the business perspective, it's very much like, oh, I'm helping out these people that put out, or these musicians that put out these samples to sell, so I buy them, I'm giving them money to eat, and they're providing me with the ability to write. Just because they put a sample out there doesn't mean it was a good sample for them.
That's true.
Because I'll chop it up, and, this note shouldn't go here, this note shouldn't go here, this one can be here, this one can't. And you take and pick it out.
You're like mining it for the good parts.
Exactly, the usable parts for me.
So you find a sample, and how do you know if it's a good sample? Like, what is a good sample to you? What makes you go, I'm going to use this in my song?
It's a feeling it gives me.
It has to feel right?
Yeah, like it's weird. When like, you have a good sample, mm-hmm. It usually brings me to the feeling of, oh, there's some sort of energy here, some sort of vibe that's really attracting me.
Yeah.
And so, actually, today I wrote a song. And it was funny. It wasn't one sample that inspired me. It was actually two samples that I'd put together that made this new kind of a sound.
Oh, I see.
And so, these different points of inspiration don't necessarily have to just come from one place.
Right.
They can come from a bunch of different places.
Yeah.
And I feel like I got that a lot from, like, listening to bands like the Gorillaz. Like, especially their first album, you listen to Clint Eastwood, mm-hmm. and
that's a good tune.
Yeah, you listen to that, and that's definitely one type of song. And then you listen to the next songs, and you're like, wait a minute, every song is a different genre of music.
Yeah.
But it all goes together so well.
They really, even their album Demon Days, they do a phenomenal job of just blending all these different feelings and all these different tunes, all these different tracks. So you find this sample that you like because it feels good.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with it after that? You try to fit it in, or what do you do with it next?
So it depends. It depends on the song, but I'll find a sample, and then I'll usually start writing the drum beat to it. And then what I'm really trying to do with this one sample is I'm trying to build the main or the biggest part of my song. And so once I have my main big part...
Like the theme?
No, not even the theme, like literally like the biggest part of my song, the loudest part of my song, the climax. Whatever the climax is, I'm writing that first. The reason I write the climax first is because it's kind of like cooking. It's a deconstruction process. Once I have the main parts of the song, which are all the parts in my climax, then I just separate them out and just allow the audience to kind of listen to how it builds up to that climax and then come back.
Oh
down.
wow! So that's pretty cool. You start from the middle and then you build out from there.
Yeah, it's the easiest thing to do for me.
Wow, I don't think I've ever heard. I might have, but I've never heard of someone writing like that.
Yeah, when I was a DJ and learning how to produce, me and my buddy Carlos, he goes by Blur the Technicolor. We used to write song. Yeah, shout out to Blur the Technicolor, even though you haven't used it for like years. Still good. Listen to on SoundCloud. But yeah, we used to write songs. We basically had like little competitions.
Okay.
We were a DJ duo.
Yeah.
And basically, he would write a song, and then I'd be like, "Oh shit, he wrote a song. I got to write a song now, and it has to be better than that song." And then I would show him, and then he would write another song, and then it was better than that song, and then we'd build off of that. And so we learned that when we wrote the songs together, that's what we ended up doing. We'd write the main part and then break it all down.
Right.
And then at the end, you're just adding like little transitional parts to make things interesting.
Oh, I see.
Like little flickers of lights, little like... It could be anything, even down to like somebody just whispering something.
Because the term is ghosting the track, and it's when you're writing like the first verse in a normal song, the song is what they call ghosted. It's down to its barest components. It's maybe vocals, some rhythm, some bass, and drums. In a rock song type setting.
Yeah.
It's the bare minimum of what you need to communicate the song, the melody and the lyrics and the beat. And then you'll go into the chorus or wherever you go next. But after the first verse, you start slowly introducing different elements into the song. By the time you get to the bridge and the last chorus, you've introduced every element of the song, and that's at its biggest. And then you start going out on the outro. You get rid of everything. So I think that's really cool. You already know the elements you want to use, or as you're writing around the climax, you're adding everything you want, and then it's just a matter of stripping it down versus dressing it up.
Yeah, I like to think of it kind of like a buffet, you know. I go up and, you know, my first plate is going to be like the most stuff. And then slowly, you know, my plate 2 and 3 just get smaller and smaller and smaller and less things to deal with. And then, you know, you just, you know, anything you don't like, you kind of just put onto that other plate.
So let's write a song. Let's do this.
Right, let's do it.
So what are we going to do first?
Okay, let's see. Well, so right now I'm going to go to Splice.
Okay.
And we're going to find a sample together. We're going to find something that speaks to us. Let me see.
Adam's finding a sample for us to use. Adam's finding a sample for us to use.
So like I was saying, so we kind of got to figure out a genre. And since I've been doing kind of like chill hop, hip hop kind of tracks, I kind of want to do something related around there.
Something very laid back.
Well, maybe not.
When I think of chill hop, we are not sponsored by Splice, the website that Adam is using to source a sample for our song. But like we've talked about in previous episodes, you use whatever resources available to you. I don't think a song has to be 100% organic from your mind. If you can write a song that's 100% organic from your own mind, more power to you. But there's nothing wrong with using available resources.
And besides, people are putting these out specifically to help musicians. And I think when I was younger, I definitely thought that this was kind of cheating. But then I realized, why would musicians be recording and putting these out if they didn't want to?
That's a good point. I had a professor who, I'm not going to name his name, and I'm not gonna name the people he worked with, but he worked with some very, very high profile musicians, and he would work with them to write their music for like live performances or music videos. He would help them write their songs, and so he would just send them a bunch of different songs. And he admitted to us in class one day that he used Apple Loops to write most of the tracks that he sent to these very high-profile musicians. And we just thought it was funny. Like, you'd be listening to the radio, and you'd hear one of their songs come on, and you'd be like, that's Apple Loops. Like, you just... it was just really, really kind of funny. But, yeah, if you have access to Apple Loops, you absolutely should use them. if you've purchased the software, then they're royalty free, and you can change them, mix them around however you want. And this professor, he was very good at remixing these things and changing the tempo. I mean, this guy was a sonic architect. But after a while, it's hard to just keep writing new stuff over and over and over. You having to use loops. You have to start using loops, and splicing them and editing them is a great way to utilize your own creativity. And it's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, it's like, when an artist, when they're making a sculpture or something, or a collage, you have to use different pieces of other artworks.
Right.
You can't just use your own.
No. That's what...
you could, but, you're just breaking all your own stuff again.
Right. Well, then there's a risk of plagiarism if you're using someone else's art,
That's true.
So, I don't know. So you found a sample.
Yep.
Why don't you play it for us?
All right, here it is. Yeah, and so it loops back over at that point.
So what do you make of that?
Yeah, so for me, that kind of just gives me this cool kind of beach riding kind of a feel to it. Kind of almost like a whimsical, just kind of a nice drive kind of a day, kind of a sound.
Yeah.
Is what I'm getting from it.
I see. That's an interesting sample. All right.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can do with it.
All right, so at this point, what I'll end up doing is I'll put a drum beat down.
Okay.
So I'll usually start off with like a kick drum, and then I have a bunch of samples of kicks and stuff that I use, and I also use, I make sure that whatever the sample I'm using is, they're all in the same key. Or at least complementary keys.
I see.
And so what I'll usually do is I'll play the sample over and over again, and I'll actually play the kicks with it until I find one that...
you like.
Exactly. Because a lot of this is really just trying to find the complementary sounds.
I see. Okay.
Because if something sounds good to your ear... it doesn't really matter what key it's in, or it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It just sounds good, and if you're getting that feeling, it's gonna be a good experience, no matter what anybody says. So, when I'm starting off with this, I'm really trying to find like a certain hip-hop-ish beat to it. But I'll start with putting 4 on the floor, which is just basically you putting a kick on every, 1, 2, 3 kind of thing.
Right.
And at this point, I'll even like kind of sing the drums to myself in my head.
Okay.
So I'll do something like, while playing.
Oh, I like it. Oh, I like it.
Boom, cat, boom, cat. So what I'll end up doing is I'll end up looping that over and over and over again, and then just plugging in, okay, this is where the kick drums go. Okay, this is where the snares go. And then I'll figure out the hi-hats and so on and so forth.
So you pick a kick and you pick
so I pick a kick and a snare.
Okay.
And that basically puts down like my basic tempo.
Okay.
And it really lays down the structure for all the rhythm.
Yeah.
So I have my background chords, which is giving us the main feel, and then we have our kick and our snare, which is giving us our time.
Sure.
At the same time that I'm usually doing this, I'm also thinking spatially as far as frequencies are concerned, and how I'm going to end up like putting my 808s in or putting in other parts at the same time. So I'm almost mixing